I'll never forget the night it happened. The Midnight Raccoon Heist. The woods were still. The kind of deep, muffled quiet you only get when the moon is high and the air hangs heavy with damp pine. I was tucked into my sleeping bag, staring at the glowing ember tips of the fire that was slowly dying down. When I first heard it, a faint rustle, followed by the soft click of claws against a cooking pot. Now, I'd hung my food bag, sure, but maybe not with the kind of care a man should when he knows the forest is full of thieves. I'd looped the cord around a branch, given it a few lazy knots, and figured it'd be enough to keep curious critters away. That night, though, I learned raccoons aren't just curious, they're organized. At first, it was one. A shadow darted into the firelight, masked face glinting like a bandit in the half-moon glow. He didn't rush at the bag. No, he circled it, inspecting, calculating. Behind him, two more slipped from the brush, moving in perfect silence, like they'd rehearsed this dozens of times. My heart thumped in my chest. I swear, it felt less like I was watching wildlife and more like I was witnessing a gangland operation. The first raccoon stood up on his hind legs, pawing at the cord, tugging it just enough to test. The second crept around the back, clawing softly at the knot. The third, he was the lookout, perched on a log, eyes darting from me to the shadows beyond camp, as if daring me to make a move. I propped myself up on an elbow, half tempted to shout, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was too precise, too deliberate. They were working together, these little forest outlaws, every whisker twitching with intent. The bag swayed gently in the tree, creaking against the branch. The smell of trail mix, jerky, and marshmallows wafting down like bait for the bold. And bold they were. With one swift leap, the leader clamped his teeth into the bag's corner and hung there, swaying like a pirate on a rope. His buddies scrambled below, paws raised, as if ready to catch whatever fell. The cord strained. My breath caught. And then, snap. The whole sack tumbled down into their waiting paws. The bag hit the ground with a muffled thud, and that's when the forest erupted into chaos, though not the kind you'd expect. I thought they'd scatter, frightened by the sound. Instead, they swarmed it. 3 raccoons became 5, then 7, slipping from the shadows, like soldiers arriving for a planned ambush. I swear to you, it was as if they'd been waiting in the wings, summoned by some silent raccoon signal, the moment the prize fell. They didn't fight each other. That was the eerie part. No snarling, no squabbling over scraps, like you might see with stray dogs. Each had a role. 2 tore at the knot, working with claws and teeth. Another held the bag taut with his weight. The smallest, barely bigger than a football, darted in and out like a courier, dragging out whatever the others managed to loosen and stashing it just beyond the circle of firelight. The lookout stayed on his log, tail twitching, keeping an eye on me. I sat frozen in my sleeping bag, equal parts horrified and fascinated. It wasn't just theft, it was a heist, a mafia-style operation carried out with precision I never would have believed if I hadn't seen it myself. The first contraband to fall out was a granola bar. The courier snatched it up and bolted into the brush. Then came a bag of peanuts, followed by 2 marshmallows that rolled across the pine needles like dice on a table. The raccoons scurried, quick as gamblers, chasing chips. I couldn't help it, I laughed. The sound startled them, and for a moment the whole gang froze, every masked face turning toward me in perfect unison. Their eyes glowed in the firelight, cold and calculating, as though they were daring me to interfere. For a heartbeat, I thought they might abandon the loot and retreat. but then the leader gave a sharp guttural bark. Whatever it meant in raccoon speak, the others understood. They went right back to work. Finally, the knot gave way, and the bag split open. My jerky, my crackers, my trail mix, all of it spilled out in a flood across the forest floor. The gang went wild, but still organized. One grabbed jerky, another nuts, another crackers. Each one seemed to know exactly what was his. The courier zipped back and forth, arms full, tail high, disappearing into the dark and returning for more. It was then I realized this wasn't their first job. I fumbled for my flashlight, thinking maybe the beam would scare them off. But before I could click it on, the lookout let out a hiss so sharp it sent the others into a frenzy. They swept up the last of the loot and vanished into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. In the silence that followed, I sat surrounded by pine needles, scraps of torn packaging, and a single marshmallow they'd missed, glowing like a pale moonstone in the dirt. My food was gone, my bag was shredded, and somewhere in the woods a gang of raccoons feasted like kings. Sleep didn't come easy after that. My stomach growled, my pride smarted, and I lay there staring at that lone marshmallow like it was the last coin in a gambler's pocket. Finally, I decided I wasn't about to let a bunch of raccoons outwit me without at least trying to reclaim my supplies. I slipped out of my bag, boots crunching softly on pine needles, and gathered what I could. A sturdy stick for courage, my flashlight for vision, and that single marshmallow, bait for a trap of my own. I set it carefully on a flat rock at the edge of camp, sat down a few yards away, and waited. The forest was thick with the smell of earth and smoke, but underneath it was something else. Roasted peanuts, sweet granola, jerky spice. They hadn't gone far. I could almost hear the faint crackle of wrappers in the dark. And sure enough, a pair of glowing eyes appeared between the trees. Then another. Then 3 more. The gang was back. And this time I could see them for what they were. A band of night marauders, circling with the confidence of thieves who'd never been caught. The leader stepped forward. The same broad-shouldered raccoon who'd orchestrated the first assault. He sniffed the air, locked onto the marshmallow, and gave a soft chitter. His crew spread out, fanning around the camp like shadows. My heart hammered. I raised my flashlight and snapped it on. The beam cut across the clearing, and for a moment it stunned them. Masked faces froze. Mid-step, glowing eyes wide. I thought I had them. I shouted, banged my stick on the log beside me, and charged forward like some wild defender of the pantry. They scattered. At least, that's how it looked. But raccoons are trickier than you think. While 3 bolted for the brush, the courier slipped behind me. By the time I swung the light around, he had my marshmallow in his tiny black hands, nibbling away with quick, greedy bites. I lunged, but he darted between my boots and disappeared into the shadows with a squeak of triumph. That should have been the end of it. But no. Seconds later, a racket broke out to my left. I spun the flashlight just in time to see the others darting back in. Not for food, this time, but for my cooking pot. One of them grabbed it by the handle, another shoved from behind, and together they sent it clattering down the slope. The sound echoed through the trees like a dinner bell. I scrambled after it, stick waving, cursing under my breath. By the time I reached the bottom of the slope, the raccoons were gone, the pot lying dented against a rock. And up above, in the shadows of the pines, I swear I heard them chittering, not the frightened squeaks of animals, but the low, throaty chuckle of bandits sharing a private joke. I trudged back to camp, defeated. My food was gone, my pot dented, and my pride thoroughly chewed through. When I crawled back into my bag, I could still hear them in the distance, their feast punctuated by little barks of laughter. That night, under the indifferent stars, I realized the truth. I wasn't the hunter, the camper, the man in control. No, I was just another mark in the ledger of the Midnight Raccoon Gang. When dawn finally broke, the forest seemed far too calm for what had happened the night before. The fire pit was nothing but gray ash. The mist hung low over the trees, and the world smelled of dew and pine needles. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it had all been a strange dream, born of hunger and imagination. But then I looked around. Camp. Wrappers were scattered everywhere, jerky torn clean from its bag, cracker crumbs ground into the dirt, and a trail of peanut shells leading straight out of camp like breadcrumbs from a fairy tale. My cooking pot, still dented from its tumble, lay where I'd left it, and my rope dangled from the branch above, like the limp remains of a failed defense. I rubbed my eyes and laughed, though it was the hollow laugh of a man who knew he'd been beaten. Still, something nagged at me. Why had they gone for the pot when they already had the food? Why had they stuck around even after I'd charged them off? It didn't sit right, so I decided to follow the trail. The peanut shells led me down a narrow game path, over roots slick with morning dew, until I came to a small clearing. There, in the crook of a fallen log, was a stash, a raccoon hideout if I'd ever seen one. My trail mix bag was torn open and half empty, granola wrappers shoved into the dirt, and the rest of my jerky completely gone. They hadn't dragged it far, just far enough to feast in peace. And there was more. Beside the food scraps were little trinkets, a soda tab, a shiny button, even the corner of a plastic spoon. Items I hadn't brought. It was like stumbling on a thieves' den, a collection of trophies taken from other unlucky campers who had wandered into their woods. As I crouched there, staring, a rustle made me freeze. Out of the brush came the lookout, the same one who had perched on a log the night before, tail twitching like a metronome. He froze when he saw me, head cocked, black eyes gleaming. For a long moment, we just studied each other. Then, with deliberate calm, he turned, picked up the shiny spoon in his jaws, and vanished back into the thickets. That was no accident. That was a message. I returned to camp uneasy, my stomach growling louder than ever. The forest seemed alive with unseen eyes, every rustle of leaves carrying more weight than it should. I packed up slowly, my hands clumsy, and when I hoisted my battered gear onto my shoulders, I caught myself glancing over them more than once. The strangest part came when I kicked dirt over the fire pit. There, sitting right at the edge, where the ash met the pine needles, was a single cracker, untouched, perfectly placed. It hadn't been there when I'd gone to sleep. It wasn't there when I'd left to follow the trail. They'd been back. I left camp that morning with an odd weight in my chest. Not the heaviness of hunger alone, but the feeling of having been measured, outmaneuvered, and, in a way, spared. As I hiked the trail, back toward the trailhead, the sun filtered through the pines in golden shafts, and birds sang bright morning songs that felt too innocent compared to the crime scene I'd just cleaned up. My pack was lighter than it should have been. Not from clever packing, but because half of what belonged in it was now in the bellies of raccoons. Every so often, I swore I caught glimpses of them, shadows darting across fallen logs, the faint glimmer of black eyes peering through ferns. They never drew close, never threatened, but they watched, always just enough to remind me that I was walking their woods on their terms. By midday, I stopped to rest near a stream. I filled my bottle, chewed on the last of the crackers I'd salvaged, and stared at the way the water rippled over stone. It struck me then how quickly pride and planning could fall apart out here. I'd thought I was clever enough, careful enough. I'd tied my bag, set my camp, believed myself the master of my tiny domain. But those raccoons had shown me otherwise. Out here, every creature had a role to play, every one of them surviving on instinct, cunning, or cooperation. I couldn't help but laugh softly, shaking my head. They'd taken my food, my dignity, even left me a mocking cracker at the fire pit. But they'd also left me with a story, a good one. And maybe that was their real gift, though I doubt they'd thought of it that way. When I finally reached the parking lot, tired and hollow, but oddly at peace, I sat on the tailgate of my old truck and looked back at the tree line. The forest stood silent, the kind of silence that feels like it's keeping secrets. Somewhere in there, I knew. The Midnight Raccoon Gang was lounging, fat and happy, licking marshmallow from their paws, smug in their victory. And me, well, I drove home lighter, both in food and in ego, but carrying a lesson worth more than jerky or trail mix. Out in the wild, you're never really in charge. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and sometimes you just become the punchline in another creature's long-running joke. Even now, years later, when I hang my food bag with a double knot and a proper counterbalance, I do it with a smile, because in the back of my mind, I can still hear the faint chittering laughter of those bandits in the night. The Midnight Raccoon Heist. It wasn't just a story. It was a reminder that the woods don't play by my rules. And I'll tell you this much. The next time I head out under the stars, I'll be ready. Or at least, I'll be ready to laugh when